Hello and welcome to Melee's Turnwheel, the series that takes a retroactive look at the Fire Emblem series chapter by chapter. I'm your host, I'm a Melee Kirby, and today we're taking it back to chapter 10 of Fire Emblem Genealogy of the Holy War. We're almost done, guys. We got this episode, we got endgame episode, and then there's probably going to be a short episode. I mentioned last time I was probably going to do a wrap-up episode to kind of close my thoughts on this game, address any loose ends. There are a couple things that I want to talk about that I've never really had a good opportunity to. Things like the ranking system, things like the clever mode AI, even though it's not very clever, they call it that. It's really the first difficulty selection that this series has had outside of Paragon mode and Gaiden, if you want to count that. But we're getting close. We're getting there. And then it's on to Thracia. So I don't really have anything else to say, and I have actually been giving some thought about putting something here at the beginning because there's been a lot of me kind of coming in, saying a couple sentences, and then being like, well, I don't really have anything else, so let's just move on. I don't want that. I want there to be a segment here at the beginning. I don't want it to be news because I don't want it to be time sensitive at the beginning because I don't, there's no guarantee that I'm gonna record this section and then put out the episode right away. It could be a week, it could be 2 weeks. I don't know how long it's going to be between recording this segment and actually getting the episode out. I've already explained this, so I don't want to do news here, but I do want to do something. And I've given some thoughts. I don't just want to like rip off something from another podcast that I listen to. I've done that for, the Map Gauntlet was I mean, ripped off is a strong word, but inspired by other podcasts and things like that. So I kind of want to come up with my own thing. I just haven't really thought of anything yet. So probably not next episode, but definitely by Thracia, I will have something here for this opening segment that is hopefully a little bit more entertaining than just me rambling for 5 minutes before we actually start the episode. So anyway, speaking of which, let us get right into our chapter for this episode, chapter 10, Light and Dark. After conquering Thracia, Seliph has decided that it's finally time to move into Grannvale and invade. And he's going up to like through Thracia's kind of northwest border, and he's going to move into Grannvale, but then he kind of detours into a country called Miletos, which is kind of situated to the south of Grannvale. Miletos is described. We got a glimpse of this last chapter, but in this chapter, this intro narration also describes it as being kind of a hub of commerce and wealth and mercantile trading, things like that. But nowadays it's become kind of a dying land, I believe is how it's described, the sort of a shadow of its former self. It's definitely not what it used to be. Hilda has taken up residence here. Hilda is, again, Tinny's mother, who is kind of a minor antagonist in this game. And there have been child hunts. We've heard about the child hunts, but we've never really seen them before. This idea that the Lobtier Empire is hunting down children to sacrifice in Grannvale. But this is the first time we really get like a glimpse of what that really looks like. And the fact that it's going on here kind of causes Seliph to decide, all right, well, we'll delay Grannvale for right now. Let's just detour into Miletos, save some of the children here, and then we can make our way into Grannvale after that. So that's what they do. We see Julius talking with Ishtar, and he's just being a really over the top, comically evil bad guy. He talks about how he loves seeing the fear and sadness in his victims' eyes or whatever, just being like really campy, I guess, for lack of a better word. I mean, it's fine. I like it. It's makes it very unambiguous that he is indeed evil, and in a game that has a lot of characters with I hesitate to say gray morality, but definitely characters who aren't straight up evil, just kind of maybe misguided or set in their beliefs in put against you for that reason. It's definitely not a bad idea, I don't think, to have a character who is just evil, just straight up. I think that it can work if you don't have that, especially if that's kind of the story you're trying to tell of like, no one's really evil. There's no, everyone's the hero of their own story kind of deal. Julius is very, very much not that. So I don't think that that's a problem necessarily. I think that it's almost comedic how over the top it is. It's like Garen levels in Fates, but here I think it works. I think that the rest of the game around it is so good that it kind of elevates it. He plans on taking a select few children to Grannvale, to Belhalla specifically, where they will not be killed or sacrificed, but actually raised to value power and to be cruel and heartless, and eventually they will become the citizens of what he kind of describes as his ideal new world order, basically. When he mentions taking them into Grannvale, Ishtar pipes up and says, "Hey, Arvis doesn't really approve of the child hunts. Don't you think he's going to cause problems for you if you do that?" And Arvis says, "No, I'll deal with him. It'll be fine. Don't worry about it." And then he leaves. Hilda comes in and starts talking to Ishtar, saying that, she's very eager for them to get married, probably mostly for political gain, if not entirely for political gain. Oh, did I say she was Tinny's mother? She's not Tinny's mother. What the fuck am I talking about? No, Tiltu is obviously Tinny's mother. Hilda kind of raised her, you guys know the deal. But she is actually Ishtar's mother. That is I believe true. I hope I'm not wrong again. I should fact check this before I start talking about it, but whatever, fuck it. And she kind of just I don't think teases is the right word, but Ishtar isn't super happy about it. She kind of gets embarrassed and walks away. Hilda receives a report that some of the children have escaped and orders some knights to go after them. We see the children actually running away, and they have a little dialogue exchange. This, first of all, just very, I mean, cute maybe isn't the right word, but it makes you feel sympathetic towards them. They're very scared. They're very nervous about they're going to get captured and killed. But they say that they've heard that Seliph is on the way, and they say to each other that the Crusaders are going to come and save them, which I believe, unless I'm mistaken, this is the first time we're hearing Seliph and his group being referred to as Crusaders, which is obviously, a parallel to the Miracle of Darna and the Crusaders there, sort of being the original heroes that saved the world from the Lobtier Empire the first time. This is the first time we're seeing a parallel drawn between Seliph and this group, which is cool, and it's subtle too. Like you could miss this easily. This is it's just a conversation between some NPCs that you got to go save. So it's not given a whole lot of attention, which I think is good. It's probably going to be later. I don't know, but it's kind of a stealth introduction here, which I enjoy. We then see Hilda's message of go capture these children being delivered to a knight. Before he gets the message, he kind of is talking to himself about how, his status as a knight is not befitting of such. It's kind of hard to explain. I think and this might have been the case in the old translation. I think maybe what they were trying to go for is that he sounds, like sad. He's like, "Oh, I don't want to have to hunt kids. This isn't what I signed up for. When I wanted to be a knight, I wanted to do honorable things or whatever." What it sounds like he just seems kind of annoyed that he has to do it. He just kind of seems pissed off, and that's the vibe that I got from him, at least. It didn't seem like a very honorable, noble kind of guy who's like, "Man, I don't really want to have to follow these orders because it's so cruel." He just kind of seems like he's not being given enough of a challenge, honestly, is more the vibe that I got from him. And he gets the order that he has to go hunt down the children, and he's like, "Oh, fuck." He had just said, if I have to hunt down one more child, I'm gonna lose it or something like that, and the message comes through that he has to go do it. And he's like, "Ah, damn it. Whatever, let's go." So he saddles up and decides that he's going to ride out to presumably hunt the children. And here we see, not Seliph specifically, but Seliph's group for the first time. Julia is wandering by herself through a town, and Manfroy shows up and takes her. He basically, she doesn't know who he is and seems to have lost her memory. Manfroy says that that's a good thing because I assume because if she knew who he was, she'd be trying to escape, but she doesn't. So he kind of he's able to get close and takes her away with him. And that's it. Julia's gone, at least for right now. We do actually get her back, unlike Deirdre. But for the next couple of chapters, she is going, or the next chapter and a half, I guess, she's going to be MIA. So, unfortunately, if you had any good items on her, you are going to have to live without them for a while. And it is at this point that we do see Seliph for the first time, and he's being told by Lewyn that there are children attempting to escape and that they're being hunted down. And Seliph immediately says, "All right, well, I guess we got to move in and save them." But before he goes, Lewyn lets him in on the fact that Julia has disappeared, and he speculates that he's been taken. Actually, I think he says that there's been eyewitness accounts that say that she was taken by Manfroy, and they both kind of spend a minute first of all being sad, like, oh shit, that's messed up. Why, you know, she's gone. That's terrible. But also they kind of think like, why would Manfroy target Julia specifically? What does he have to gain from this? Which I did write it down, but I didn't like make the connection in my head right away. I had to think about this for a second. Lewyn doesn't know, which I didn't realize at first. I always assumed that he knew who Julia was, which wouldn't make sense actually now that I'm thinking about it because he kind of teases Seliph about like having a crush on her or whatever. So if he knew that they were like siblings, that would be kind of weird. um, but no, it's just kind of I mean, maybe you don't want to call it a coincidence. Maybe you want to call it fate or whatever. I don't know by what rules this game or this world's logic operates. They didn't have to end up together for sure. Lewyn did not put them together intentionally. He just kind of was helping a who he saw as a helpless girl and putting her in a position where he thought she would be safe, and he didn't know that she was going to be the key to defeating Julius, which raises a lot of interesting points. I mean, I've kind of been dancing around some of the stuff with Lewyn because I didn't want to spoil it, but it definitely raises some questions of like how much does he really know? And based on some stuff we get about him later, how does that parse with what we learn about him later, basically? Also, it calls into question his whole plan because it is possible to defeat Julius without using Julia. It's difficult, but you can do it. So I guess that was just his plan, right? Just Seliph is gonna have to figure it out because we don't have the one like counter to Julius's power. But putting all that aside, Seliph decides to go in and save the children, and that's where the map begins. Now, right off the bat, we have a few conversations that I want to make note of. The first is between Leaf and Nana, and it is a lover conversation. Not a lover conversation as in they have to be married, but it is one that gives them some love points together, and I believe actually, as soon as I got this, they got married. It's just a really cute conversation about how he talks about how his father Quan bought Ethlyn some kind of pearl necklace or something like that at a market in Miletos when they were first, meeting and falling in love. He kind of says like, I want to buy one for you too. It's just cute, and it gives some context into Quan and Ethlyn's relationship that I think is adorable. But other than that, doesn't really have anything noteworthy. I think it gives a stat boost here. Let me check. Yes, she gets plus 3 HP, so, and 100 love points. This initial section of the chapter is really obnoxious. There are a bunch of this chapter in general is kind of obnoxious in terms of enemies. There's a lot of magic users who most of your team isn't really well equipped to take on. This is where a trained Claude Lester might come in handy, but I didn't train Lester, so he was like the only character that I didn't train. But he could have been useful here with the brave bow or killer bow or something, and also his high resistance. But there's also sleep staves everywhere that will put your units to sleep. Thankfully, the restore staff is long range, so Lana doesn't have to get up in the action in order to save them, which is nice. But it's still really tricky. And then, of course, there are some enemies coming to fuck you up after you've already been kind of softened up by the magic users. So it's a tough beginning of a map for sure. Probably the hardest that beginning section of a map has been the whole game. But eventually you will make it to the first castle, which is being controlled by Hilda. Hilda has a really nice conversation with Tinny here. I've already talked about how the boss conversations are really a big part of the reason why Tinny is my favorite character in this game. She goes from being this meek, soft-spoken character who can't stand up for herself to being able to successfully deal with and get revenge on this evil, evil woman who has caused her and her mother so much torture and pain. So it's some nice character development for her for sure, even though it mostly happens off screen. But after you beat her, she runs away. She'll be back. She doesn't actually die here. But now we're in a position to rescue the children. And actually, I don't know if I ever mentioned this before now, but there have been a couple chapters where you can rescue civilians. It happened in chapter 4. I believe that was it for Gen 1, but then it also happened in chapter 8 of this game. And then now again, it's happening. And whoever you send to get the villager or child or whoever it is, whoever rescues the civilian, will get 100 EXP, which is a really good way to get underleveled characters up to the level of the rest of your units. This is actually how I managed to, by the end of this chapter, get every single character promoted except for Lester, and he's still at like level 7 or whatever. So yeah, he's not going to be doing anything for the rest of the game probably. But yeah, even including, oh sorry, also not Layla. I don't know if dancers can promote in this game. I've never gotten any of them to level 20, but she doesn't really count. But even kind of shitty ones like Daisy and Charlo, those characters are all level 20 now as well. Eventually you do have to deal with that knight who was sent to kill the children, and he's pretty tough. It took me a few tries to take him down. I overextended a few times. This is gonna be, it's gonna be. I've played some Fire Emblem like on the side, outside of doing this podcast, and it's difficult to adjust to playing a game that doesn't have these save functions. I've honestly mostly been playing Three Houses and Radiant Dawn, both of which have, well, Radiant Dawn has the battle save feature, and Three Houses has the Turnwheel or the Divine Pulse as they call it in that game. So they have similar mechanics of, well, this will get you out of a bad situation if you fuck up. And I've gone back occasionally. I think I played a little bit of Thracia, and I'm like, shit, man, I'm gonna have to get used to not having this, aren't I? And I'm gonna have to get better at Fire Emblem, or just like have to reset 60 million times. That's gonna be interesting. But anyway, you beat that castle. There's actually no rush at this point. There's nothing. I think there's like a bandit up north that you have to deal with, but otherwise there's really nothing stopping you from just taking your time here, capturing that southwest castle. There's a magic ring in one of the villages over there. But when you capture both of these castles, Seliph is like, "Hey, well, we captured or we rescued some children, but I know that there are more being sent to Grannvale. Are they here? No? Okay." And then they move on. Your children are in another castle. Once you've captured both of these southern castles, the gateway to the north opens up, and we get a cutscene between Arvis and Ishtar. This is our first time seeing Arvis post time skip, and he has a very defined jawline. That is the first thing that I noticed about him. But he's also just chatting it up with Ishtar. I mean, potentially his future daughter-in-law, so I think he's just trying to build a good rapport. But he also demands the release of the captured children. Ishtar puts up a bit of a fight. She says, "Well, Julius asked me to do this," and Arvis says, "Well, I'm above his head, so just listen to me and do what I say, and I will deal with Julius later." And she seems like she's about to do it, but then Julius steps in and says, "No, you have to listen to me. I'm in charge here. Your reign of power has basically come to an." He basically goes full on mask off and says, "Listen, I'm the one who has the power here. Stop pretending like you can tell me what to do." And Arvis kind of concedes, yeah, and basically just tells Julius that he can do whatever he wants. Now, Julius kind of challenges him. He says, "Hey, if you think that you can stop me, then why don't you try banishing me?" And Arvis says, "No, I know better than to try something so futile again," which implies that he has tried it before and got severely put in his place. And then Julius kind of insults him, says, "You need to guard Chalfie. This is really important. This is our first step into Grannvale. Don't fuck up for once." Bye, basically. And then Arvis leaves. We get a scene between Julius and Manfroy. This is one of the most infamous scenes in the game where Julius basically tells Manfroy to kill Julia because she's the only one who can potentially, I mean, this isn't technically true, but is the only like legitimate threat to his power. And Manfroy says, "Well, maybe we should keep her alive. Just, she's not going to be that big of a deal. She doesn't have the Book of Naga. She can't really hurt you." And Julie says, "No, we're not doing that. We're not risking it. Just kill her." And Manfred is like, "Okay," but then doesn't do it. And is ultimately very, very badly punished for that decision. There's a little bit of dialogue here that actually implies something interesting. Manfroy says that, they're talking about the Liberators, and Manfroy says that soon I will have Seliph's corpse for you. And Julius is like, "Seliph? Who?" And then he's like, "Oh, yeah, 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 that guy, the so-called Scion of Light or whatever." And then he goes on to say that Seliph is the alleged son of Deirdre, and then that's just a fairy tale that the peasants say to make themselves feel better or whatever. And I find this really interesting that Julius doesn't actually know, which I think is weird. I mean, I don't know, right? Like, how would he know? But at the same time, everyone else seems to know, right? Like, I mean, I don't know how this rumor spread around in the first place, but it seems like Julius would have figured it out by now, right? Especially, and maybe this is evidence against something that I said early in an earlier episode, because I speculated that maybe Arvis knew Deirdre and Sigurd were together, and if he did, it seems like maybe he would have told Julius about it, although maybe he was keeping it hidden on purpose. I don't know. There's a lot of questions here that I have, but mostly it's just kind of is a crack in the armor. I think Julius has seemed so all powerful and all knowing up to this point. He kind of just walks around, does whatever he wants. He has been kind of enigmatic, and this is the first time we're seeing that, like, oh, maybe he doesn't know everything. Maybe he's not all powerful. So I thought that was cool. But otherwise, the scene is pretty uneventful, other than what I said earlier about Manfroy being kind of an idiot and not killing Julia like he was ordered to. I want to talk about this scene with Arvis. I know that he has more moments later on, and I don't think that Arvis, like, I'm gonna do a disclaimer here and say that I think that Arvis is a very well written character still, but I don't like this scene at all. I think that when I played this game for the first time, I thought that Arvis was so cool, he was so badass, and he was very threatening and intimidating. He had a very menacing aura. And I know that that was partially, I don't want to say unintentional. I think it was very intentional, but I know that he wasn't meant to be an evil person, right? He's a good person who goes about doing good things, objectively good. I mean, if you want to say objectively in terms of morality or ethics, then he, for a very long time, brought peace to the kingdom or the empire. His empire was prosperous and people were happy for a very long time, according to some of the information we've gotten earlier. But he goes about achieving that in very underhanded, very deceitful, and ruthless ways. So I get that he was never meant to be evil, but he's always had this aura of menace and of power that I thought was really fun and made him, it was kind of, for me at least, it was kind of the defining aspect of his character, even more so than his like morality and his goals and objectives. That to me was like all the subtext is the wrong word. I think more so like it didn't feel as impactful. Like, he said it out loud. He was talking to Manfroy, he was talking to himself or whatever. He kind of set his goals and objectives and what he wanted to accomplish and what he did accomplish. But that to me all felt like you have to read and understand what he meant by that. Whereas this aspect to his character of this intimidating nature was just plain on the surface for anyone to see. You don't have to even be able to read the dialogue to get that sense of him. You just have to listen to the music. You have to see like what his kind of like upturned, smug looking expression to get a sense of what this guy was all about. And to me, that was always the more interesting, not the more interesting, but the more resonant part of his character. And here it is completely taken away. And maybe that's intentional. Maybe that's supposed to be like, oh, how the mighty have fallen. And I get that. I think that it's not bad necessarily. I just, on a personal level, don't care for it. I wish that he had more of a. I don't really know what I would even do to change this, right? Because it's not something you can really change. I wish that, like, I guess part of me wants him to join Seliph, which I know kind of is undermining his character in other ways. I think we can get to this later, but I think that Arvis joining Seliph would have been fine. I don't think it would have necessarily ruined his character or anything like that. So I would have liked him to be able to like stand up for himself and take a stand. And he sort of does. We'll get to that later, but he still goes out. Well, again, we'll get to this later, but he really all we get to see from him in Gen 2, and maybe this is what it is, right? Maybe it's not necessarily that I want to change what happens to his character, but I would have liked to see more scenes of him asserting himself as an authority. Because as it stands, the only time we see him in Gen 2, he gets stepped on by Julius and then has to go behind his back to rescue the children, and then he dies. That's all we get from Arvis in Gen 2. Whereas I think that that's such a disservice to this character that was such a central part of Gen 1. So I think maybe more than anything, I would have just liked to see him more doing things that aren't getting stepped on by Julius. But I also would have, if you can't do that, then maybe have him join Seliph. I don't know. I think that would have been cool. So Julius and Ishtar take to the battlefield, and like I said, we fought Ishtar before, but this is our first time fighting Julius. Before we get to them, we have to go through some more mages and sleep staves. There's a lot of sleep staves. There's like 5 or 6, I think. I didn't count, but it's a really high number, and the restore staff only has so many uses. I actually broke it after a while, and I had to just kind of at that point I had gotten rid of most of the mages, so I was able to just safely wait for everyone to wake up naturally. But then eventually you do have to deal with Arvis and Julia, or Arvis. I'm 0 for 2. Um, Ishtar and Julius. They're very very threatening, or I should say, Arvis is very very threatening. Now, there's a couple different ways you can get out of this scenario. The first thing you can do is kill off one of your characters. If a character dies, they will leave. They're sort of playing a game where they say the first one to kill one of the liberators wins, basically. And if someone dies, they will leave. At their hands, if someone dies, they will leave. There's actually a village around here that kind of suggests that that's what you should do. It says that you're no match for Prince Arvis, or Prince. God fucking damn it! You're no match for Prince Julius, so sometimes you have to make sacrifices. And honestly, it's not a bad play if you have either Sed or Corporal able to use the Valkyrie staff. Then you can just revive someone at the beginning of next chapter, or even if you want to use the return staff or something, you can revive someone in this chapter. The second way you can do it is by defeating Ishtar, which is extremely easy and definitely the best way to do it, in my opinion. Anyone who has Forseti, whether that's Sed or Arthur or even a promoted corporal, if you can manage it, can probably deal with her no problem. I think I had Ares do it with Mistletoe. Anyone who can use a holy weapon, because she is using Mjolnir, but she's not that hard to take down. As long as you can survive a hit and one round her, which is not difficult because she's not that fast. Or crit, that's another alternative. Easy peasy. But there is a third way, and that is by defeating Julius, which is extremely hard. And on my first playthrough, I did it. It is fun, first of all. The reason I did it in my first playthrough is because I didn't realize that defeating Ishtar would cause Julius to leave. I just thought he would stick around. So it's difficult. First of all, your hit rates on him are going to be pretty shaky. But the big ways that I've found to do it is Astroprox with the Sword Twins, Larse and Ulster, and then Mistletoe crits. Because what happens, what is so difficult about Julius, first of all, he's just really powerful. He deals a lot of damage. He's fairly fast. Or actually, I don't think he's fairly fast. But the real thing, the real kicker about him is that his tome cuts all incoming damage in half. And it gives him a massive defense boost. So it's very unlikely that any attack that isn't a crit will do more than one damage to him. He's always going to take one damage. The way that genealogy works, every attack does a minimum of one damage. So Astroprox, that's already, if you get two, that's already 10 damage per character, so that's already up to 20 damage. If you dance, you could potentially get it up to 40 damage. You have to roll the dice, but again, you have battle saves, so that's not that hard. And then, of course, a good old fashioned crit from Mistletoe will take him out pretty quickly as well. Not, it doesn't even I don't even think a crit, like a double crit, kills him. You need really high attack power to do substantial damage to him. But I did manage it my first ever playthrough. This time I just killed Ishtar because that's so much easier. I kind of wanted to flex and do it again, but I was like, nah, whatever, it doesn't matter. I don't like Ishtar. I think that she's kind of set up as being this Camus archetype character. I think she's sort of the Camus of Gen 2, where she is supposedly against what Julius is doing but is in love with him, so she's kind of her judgment's kind of clouded, and she knows right from wrong, but she also can't bring herself to come around to the good side. I think that's what they're going for with her character. As it comes across, she's just a fucking monster. Julia, okay, so just take it in this chapter. Past couple chapters, whatever, she hasn't really played that significant of a role. Actually, I will say in chapter 8, she convinced her father to give her the holy weapon so that he would just die. I don't know if that was her reasoning specifically, but that was kind of the angle that I thought she was going for. She's like, "Hey, I'll fight for you, but you gotta give me Mjolnir." And then she goes out and fights, and then when she loses, she's like, "Bye, see ya, suckers," and just leaves. Then in this chapter, Julius is talking about how he loves the sobbing of women who have, their children are going to be taken and sacrificed. It's just like, yeah, whatever. Let's go do something else. Or, she doesn't seem off put by it. She does change the subject, but she doesn't seem off put by it at all. Then when Arvis is like, "Hey, give me the children so that they don't die," she's kind of like, "Well, I don't know." And then in this instance, when she's fighting alongside Julius, if she kills someone, she's like, "Ha, I got him!" Like she's thrilled. She's having the time of her fucking life. And this game yet wants me to believe that she's this kind of tragic, misunderstood villain who isn't really, she does know right from wrong, but she's misguided or whatever. I don't know. I don't know what the game wants me to think about her, but I just wanted to rant about that real quick because I think that she kind of has this perception in the fandom of being again, of being a Camus archetype who isn't evil necessarily. She's just threw in her lot on the wrong side and isn't altogether satisfied with that. But no, she seems pretty satisfied with that. I don't know what people are talking about. Maybe it's just a translation thing or maybe it changes later on. But and there's also the angle of maybe Julius is scaring her or intimidating her into doing it, but that doesn't explain the joy and ecstasy in her voice when she kills a member of the Liberation Army. Food for thought. We get access to a bunch of conversations here, but I'm actually going to wait until the end to talk about those so that it's easier to just talk about them all at once. After defeating Ishtar and Julius, you can capture Miletos, the capital city, and once again, your children are in another castle, so they have to go and invade Chalfie, which is a very fitting location for the end of this map, because it means that next map is going to start at Chalfie, just like the very first map did, except we're going in the other direction. But before that, we see a scene of Arvis in Chalfie talking to a guy named Palmark, and he sends the children free under the care of Palmark. He says, "Get them out of here. More of Julius's goons are going to be here soon, so get them out. And I'm also going to give you this." And it doesn't say what it is, but Palmark is like, "Wait, isn't this?" And then he gets cut off and says, "Yeah, it's you were close confidant to Sigurd or whatever, so you know what to do with this." And he says, "Yes, I understand. Thank you." And then he leaves. Then Julia shows up, and they have a really nice heart to heart where Julia basically says, or no, Arvis apologizes, says, "I'm so sorry. I let all this happen. By the time I realized what was going on with Manfroy, it was far too late, and now Julius has control of everything. He killed Deirdre, and he's going to kill you too." Her memory is starting to come back. She says, "Mother sacrificed herself for me to get me as far away as possible, and I did, but then Lewyn found me. The trauma made my memory go away." Stuff. It's just exposition mostly. And Arvis just said, "I wish I had more time with you." He tries to get her out of there. He tries to get her to run away with Palmark, but Manfroy comes in and says, "No, that's not going to happen." Arvis once again tries to leverage his authority, but Manfroy is no longer listening to him because he is not in power anymore. Essentially, it's all Julius now at this point. And he also sends some dark mages out to kill the children that he just set free. And then one last thing before they go, Arvis gives her Deirdre's old circlet and says something about how this is the only thing that can save you now. We don't get any information on what that means, but Manfroy stops him from giving it to her. Now we can approach Chalfie, and it's a tough approach. A lot of strong enemies here. But eventually you will make it to Arvis, and you will realize that he is extremely powerful. He's definitely the hardest boss we've had to fight so far, outside of Julius, and he can't be taken down by normal means. Even other holy weapons aren't as effective as you might think, because he is on a throne, he gets the passive healing, he does a ton of damage, and the only other, like, Forsetti is usually my go-to for dealing with holy weapons, but it's at a weapon triangle disadvantage here. Mistletoe doesn't really help that much. So there's not a lot to be done. But if you have Seliph, and I sent a few other characters to go get the children as well. If you have Seliph talk to Palmark, he gives Seliph Tearfing in all its glory. Seliph asks Palmark how he got this, and Palmark says, "I'm sorry, I can't tell you. I swore an oath," which is interesting because it's implied that Arvis made him swear to not tell Seliph that he got it from him. It's not even implied, that's just objectively what's being said, which again, I don't understand. That's frustrating. Why doesn't Arvis just team up with him? But it's okay. So he gets Tearfang, and now with that plus 20 resistance bonus he gets, he can go and kill Arvis. They have a really nice boss conversation. I unfortunately don't remember exactly what it says, and the script does not have it in here, so I can't go look at it. I'm pretty sure Arvis taunts Seliph a little bit, which is interesting. Again, we'll unpack this all in a second. But presumably Seliph kills Arvis, captures Chalfie, and there's some musing about the fact that, he's been away from his birthright for so long. This is his true home where he belongs, and he's finally here. He's finally back. But there's still a lot still left to be done. They still need to go save Julia. This is where Lewyn actually kind of teases him about how he has a thing for her, and he's like, "No, that's not true." Again, obviously, I guess Lewyn does not realize that they are brother and sister, or half brother and half sister, I guess, if we want to be specific. And there is still Julius to take care of, and all of Grannvale to conquer, or liberate, I guess. And that's where the chapter ends. I want to talk a little bit about this bit with Arvis because I briefly touched on this, I should make it clear, I do understand kind of what the game is going for here. I believe, well, first of all, I should also say I know that him joining Seliph wouldn't make a ton of sense, like realistically, because Arvis is sort of the figurehead of this entire empire. So it'd be kind of weird for them to just be like, "Yeah, come join us, man. We'll forgive you." You know, he did I mean, honestly, in Gen 1, he did a lot of very bad things. He is not a pure innocent person, right? Even though he did all those things for a good reason, he still committed a lot of crimes. He did murder Sigurd and all of his army and things like that. So I get that. Fire Emblem has definitely had less to go on in terms of making characters join your team. So I get that. Like that part isn't a super big obstacle in my opinion. Like you could make it work, it would be fine. But I get that. I think more so what the game is trying to do here is say that Arvis. I mean, but it's implied by the fact that he gives Tyrfing to Palmark. You know, he's basically opening himself up to the possibility that he will die. And I think you have to read between the lines here a little bit, make a few assumptions about Arvis to really get why he does this. But I think it's mostly that he just wants to atone in his own way. Like I don't think he wants to atone by joining Seliph. And part of me, I think, still thinks he has this animosity towards Sigurd. There's still a little bit of that left. We could go into all that. I mean, that maybe this is evidence for the fact that he knew Deirdre and Sigurd were together, and he was in love with Deirdre. So maybe he kind of harbors this animosity towards Sigurd. His boss conversation with Seliph seems to imply this. I don't know. Or maybe that's just all an act. There's a lot here that's ambiguous, and I think that that's good. I don't want to know everything about what's going on in Arvis's head, but it's certainly I certainly wish I knew a little bit more, just a little bit more to go on, because as it stands, this is a little frustrating, not knowing precisely what is what's his deal, what does he want, how much of this is an act, and how much of it is him still legitimately wanting to rule, like stand against Seliph as the Emperor of Grannvale. Oh, and after you beat Arvis, there's a secret event where if Seliph goes to a spot near where he got Tyrfing, the ghosts of his dead parents come back and start talking to him. And this is held up as being one of the best moments in the game. I disagree. I think it's a little silly, and I think that introducing ghosts and spirits in Fire Emblem is a bit campy and a bit confusing. I get thematically it's nice to have him have this moment with Sigurd and Deirdre where they say like, "Oh, we're so proud of you. There's still so much for you to do, and we wish that we could have been with you." They kind of praise Lewyn for doing so much to guide him up to this point. They have this last final teaching moment with him. They tell him to stay humble and to recognize the plight of the common man, stuff like that. Your truth is not the reality of all. That's some Star Wars Obi-Wan shit. So they're basically telling him to be a good leader. I don't like this scene. I'm just gonna come out and say it. I don't think I could be wrong. I don't think that dead spirits coming back in their like true form is a very common thing in the series. I think it happens occasionally, usually with like dragons and gods. I think it happens like with Milla in Shadows of Valentia, but they don't really use this moment for anything thematically relevant. I guess like all they're doing is telling him things that Lewyn could have told him anyway. I don't really know how I would have changed the scene to make it better. I mean, I think it can work. I think that it's a kind of a goofy concept, but if it was satisfying thematically, then I would be fine with it. I wouldn't care. But it's not to me. I just don't think that this is really like nothing about this is like, oh man, I'm really glad Seliph got to hear this. His parents teaching him how to be a good leader. I think that if they were gonna do this scene, they should have had it be maybe his parents just spending the whole time reflecting on how proud they are. I don't think. Wait, hold on. Let's take a look here for a second. So Deirdre says, "Oh, Seliph, how you've grown," And then I believe that is the last time that they say anything remotely resembling pride in him. Yes. Okay. So they say, "Wow, Lewyn did a good job of getting you this far. Don't forget that you owe your companions because they helped you to get this far." He says, "I beat Arvis. I finally avenged Dad." And she's like, "All right, well, what about Julius and Julia?" And then Sigurd comes in and says, "Listen, you got to stay humble. This wasn't just your accomplishment. Other people helped you as well. You got to recognize the plight of the common man, or else this will have been for nothing." And then they say, "Take care." That is all. There's nothing in here about like, "Good job, you did it. We're so proud of you. We're happy about the man you've become," etc., etc. It's just all like teaching him lessons, which feels weird to me. I don't know. I don't like this scene. I don't think this does I don't think this accomplishes nearly what they wanted it to. And maybe that would have been too cliche, right? Like maybe it would have been too campy to have them come back and say, "Oh, we're so proud of you." Maybe they just wanted this to be a moment where he reflects on what he's still lacking in. But then I don't know why they need the set dressing of his parents coming back. It just feels weird. It feels out of character for Deirdre and Sigurd. It doesn't, like, they're not the type of parents that wouldn't say something like that. But a lot of people like it, and that's fine if you like it. Like, I'm not trying to shit on your opinion and say that you're wrong. I just didn't get anything out of this emotionally. It didn't really have a good payoff for me. Hey, so it's been a couple days since I recorded this segment, and I've had time to think about it a little bit more. I'm editing it right now, so I'm hearing it talked back at me. And I had a brainwave of a way that I can interpret the scene and actually really get a lot out of it. And this is one of those kind of goofy, I don't think this is actually what's going on, but it's fun to think about, and it's how I kind of make this scene more meaningful for me personally. So obviously, I don't think that this is really true per se. I just think that this is a fun way to interpret it that makes it work better for me. What if this moment is actually not real, but instead some kind of hallucination or otherwise just kind of happening in Seliph's head? Now, I'm sure a bunch of you just groaned and rolled your eyes when I said that, but hear me out. It fills in a lot of the gaps that I had problems with. Already, it kind of answers the question of, well, why are his dead parents ghosts here? I thought that the whole point of lampshading this in chapter 3 of this idea that there is life essence, and granted, they never said this explicitly, but this is how I always interpreted it. There's life essence that dissipates the longer that someone is dead, and if they're dead for too long, you can't bring them back with the Valkyria staff. I always thought that that was there to lampshade why they didn't just bring everyone's dead parents back to life after, the staff, when they have the staff in Gen 2, assuming that you get it. This would explain that, right? Because they're not real. They're not actually there. If their ghosts are there, then it's like, well, I mean, why can't you revive them then? If their spirit essence is strong enough to have physical sentient, well, I guess not physical, but sentient ghosts, then it should probably be strong enough to be brought back with the Valkyria staff, right? Well, this explains that. It also explains why they're so blunt and to the point and kind of acting a little bit out of character. It's because Seliph never actually knew what they were like. He's kind of envisioning idealized or very simplified two-dimensional versions of who his parents were. And the reason they don't praise him and instead put a lot of the emphasis on others and what other people did to get him to where he is now is because that's very much how Seliph thinks of himself, right? We've seen it before, and we actually see it again later on in this chapter, which we'll talk about in a minute, that he doesn't see himself as being anything special or that he did anything worth to give him the level of recognition that he's being given. He's very humble, he's very modest, and he is always reflecting on what other people have done to help him. So this seems like it would be like, why would they tell him all this if he already knows it? And maybe that's the reason. Maybe it's because that's how he is envisioning his progress up to this point, as being a product of other people, and that he still has a lot to learn and a lot to keep in mind if he's going to be a good leader. And also, again, the idea of him caring about the common man is something that would have been very he would have had this hammered in his head already by Lewyn, and especially by Shannon growing up in hiding in Isaac. He spent a lot of time with, the common people, I assume. So this is something that he would already have a firm grasp on, which again begs the question, well, then why are they telling him this? Unless it's him in his own head reminding himself to keep that in mind as he goes forward. I don't know. It's a fun idea. I like this scene a lot more now through that lens, whether you think that that's lame or whether you think that that's a fun new way to look at it as well. I hope that I have given you a new way of thinking about it. It made me like it a little bit more, so maybe it did the same for you. All right, anyway, back to the episode. I should say that I've been mostly pretty negative on the story in this chapter. I complained about Arvis, I complained about Ishtar, I complained about this scene with Sigurd and Deirdre. And the beginning of the map doesn't really have a whole lot going on narratively. It's mostly just the back half. But I will say that I think that there's a lot to like here. I do like Arvis's end. I like that, even though he isn't in a position of power anymore, he still does what he can to help the children and to help Seliph overcome him. And I also think that this chapter being the first place where parallels are drawn between Seliph and his liberation army and the old 12 Crusaders, I think that that's pretty cool. So there is stuff here that I like in terms of the story. It's just not that much. This feels kind of like another. I think the past few chapters have been kind of mid in terms of the story, and this is generally the consensus, I think, right? Like people praise Gen 1 for having this amazing story with political maneuvering and the end obviously with Sigurd dying and everything like that. Arvis being a good villain. And I think that there is a lot here to like. It's mostly just kind of spread out really far. I think a lot of the stuff with Trevant is really cool. Really, Thracia in general. Some of the stuff with Leaf has been really good, and Leinster in general with Finn and later Altena, etc., etc. And then some of the character interactions have been really good. I'm going to go through now and talk about some of the conversations we get in this chapter. I talked about one at the beginning. That was because we just unlocked it at the beginning. That was the only notable one. Shannon and Seliph have a really nice conversation where Shannon says that I've taught you everything I can. You've become a natural sword fighter. I think Seliph says like swordplay has become as natural as breathing to me because of you. And they just have a cute little moment to reflect on how far they've come. Seliph expresses concern because he's like, "You look a little tired. You good, bro?" And Shannon teases him and saying, "Hey, don't treat me like some old man." It's just cute. Pivel and Lana have a little thing here where they talk about children, and Lana's like, "I'm scared to be out here, but I want to rescue the children." And Pivel says, "Oh, you like children?" And he says, "I don't really care for children." Even though Pat, it was Patty's idea to run the orphanage, or I guess Daisy's in the case of Asalo. And I don't really like kids that much. And Lana's like, "You're not fooling anybody. The kids love you, and you love them. You just don't like to show it. You just don't like to look like a softie or whatever." Nice little conversation. Leaf and Altena talk about Arion, and Altena's kind of feeling down about him. She tells Leaf that it's rumored that Julius snuck him away after their battle, and Leaf says, "Oh, well, that's great news, because if he's still alive, that means that we can still convince him to come around to our side." And Altena is very pleased by that thought. Oifi and Seliph have maybe my favorite conversation. Well, my favorite non-Lewyn conversation, but we'll get to those in a second. Oifi and Seliph have this exchange about Chalfie, because they're both really connected to this place. Oifi was there for a good chunk of his life, the first half of his life basically, and Seliph has never been there, but it's his ancestral home. He reflects there about all the people who he loved there, Oifi does, or all the people that he loved there who were happy and kind to him. He says Sigurd, Ethlin, he even brings up Noy Shanalik, not Arden. Poor Arden. Not even Oifi thinks about Arden. Seliph actually reflects on the fact that he's never been to Chalfie, and he's never actually even been in Grannvale or near Grannvale. He was born in Augustria and then raised in Seliph and Isaac for the most part. So he's never been near Grannvale, and yet he's coming in as this supposed prince of Grannvale who's gonna come in and liberate everyone and rule, and he feels kind of like he's getting some imposter syndrome, which is a very common thing. This idea that somehow you are tricking people by, you know, like you're only successful by tricking people. You're not actually good at what you do or worthy of your position. You're just deceiving everyone to get to where you are, which is almost always not true. In case you're out there suffering from some imposter syndrome, you're doing fine. Keep up the good work. You're not tricking anybody. Oifi expresses sympathy to this idea, but assures him that this is the will of the people and that he's going to be a great ruler and everyone's going to love him. He actually says that the people see him as a kind of hero or legendary successor to Sigurd and Deirdre, and now he's kind of worried that he has this reputation and he's not going to be able to live up to it. Yeah, he even draws the parallel. He says it sounds like you're talking about me like some kind of god. And Oifi actually kind of this isn't really like a dig. It kind of comes across as one, I think, but he basically says, yeah, they only think that way because the Empire is so bad that by comparison, anyone who's gonna do a halfway decent job is like a god to them. Corpool has a conversation with Altana or Charlo. They actually have the same exchange that Seliph and Julia have last chapter about Charlo wants to use the ward spell on her, and Altana says that takes a lot of effort. That takes a lot out of the caster. Are you sure you want to risk doing this? And Corporal says, or Charlo says, I guess they're establishing a kind of relationship here that hasn't really existed up to this point. But basically, Charlo says, you're the closest thing I've had to a mother. You've always been there for me, and I want to do something to help you too. And Altana says, all right, fine, but don't if it seems like you're gonna hurt yourself, please stop. And he says, okay. And then they do it. And now we get to the Lewyn conversations. These are excellent. I'm gonna read the third. I've only read 2 out of the 3. I'm gonna read the third one right now. Okay, so the one of them isn't that great. I'll start with that one, I guess. Lewyn has a conversation with 3 of his potential daughters. One of them is Lean. This one's kind of lame. She just says, "Hey, do you know my parents?" And he's like, "Why would you think that?" And she's like, "You know everything," which is funny. I like that part. But he says, "Well, I want you to worry about yourself. You're not your parents' daughter. You are yourself. So don't worry too much about them." But they did love each other, and they did see each other. They did part in a very rough time, but they cared about each other very much. Lean says, "I always felt like there was someone watching over me. I think that must have been my dad, but I don't know why he won't show himself to me, and it's very lonely not knowing who they are." And Lewyn kind of gets sad about that. He has one with Fee. This is his, I guess, the canonical one. And Lewin's kind of an asshole here. I think this is great though. I think he's really just struggling to know how to relate to his daughter here. He's trying to crack jokes. He's calling her stubborn. He says that he's there to apologize, and he says, and I quote, "Ignoring you clearly wasn't the best idea I've ever had," which is understatement of the year. I guess supposedly when she first saw him in chapter 6, she tried to go up and talk to him, but he just ignored her. And at that point, she got so angry that she said, "All right, well, I'm not going to bother doing this unless he is going to extend the olive branch to me first." And Lewyn calls her a brat, and she gets so mad. She's like, I'm done with this. I'm so angry at you right now." And then she said, "Maybe if she hadn't married such an awful man, Mom would still be with us." And I think that touches a nerve on Lewyn. because he says that, I messed up, but that's none of your business, which I think is wrong and bullshit, but I can see where he's coming from. He says that's our business, and you guys have no right to interfere with that. And she tries to say something else, and then he cuts her off and snaps at her and says, "That's the only thing you have to worry about," and then leaves. So he gets mad. Clearly, I think that the insinuation that he was the reason that Aranis died obviously touched a nerve and made him angry. I think that it's bullshit to say that they have no right to be mad that their mom died. I mean, granted, I don't think that it is Lewyn's fault. I don't think that him leaving is what caused Erin to die. I think that she just got sick or something, and I don't think Lewyn being there would have done anything. It would have probably made her happy, and it would have made him a better father to his children. I'm not saying that it was a good idea for him to leave. I think that he was still kind of shitty for leaving, but presumably they worked it out. Presumably they talked about it. I don't know. Maybe they didn't. But Lewyn and Erin, especially because they have such a strong connection in the story. They have a lot of lover conversations together. It's very clear that they were happy and in love. So it's hard for me to believe that Lewyn just would leave without saying anything. I imagine that they probably talked about it first. Maybe I'm misremembering because maybe they talk about that in an earlier chapter. So maybe he did just leave. I don't know. Either way, my point is that I don't think I'm not like absolving him of being a bad father or even a bad husband, but I think it's a little harsh to say that he is the reason that Aaron died, because I think that's just completely untrue. But at the same time, it's definitely wrong of him to say, this was our thing, you don't have a right to comment on it, because they absolutely do. That's their mother, and you're their father. So, I don't think either side is completely in the right here. But that's cool. That's interesting. And then finally, my favorite of the three, of course, is with Tinny. And I mean, there's not really a whole lot to this one. Tinny just basically gives him her life story, and it's so sad and tragic that he starts crying about it. There's a cute moment. I mean, maybe cute is the wrong word because it's so horrible, the context, but she says, "I think you're crying," and he says, "No, no, that's just sweat. I'm just sweating." Um, I think it's interesting that out of all of these, Aaron is the only pairing where her kids actually know that he is their dad. Tinny and Lean seem none the wiser. And that is all of the conversations, at least the notable ones. There's one with Lester and Patty at the beginning that isn't that cool. You can go look it up if you want to. And that is it for chapter 10. So I guess in terms of our map gauntlet, I don't even remember. I think chapter 3 was still winning, right? Yeah, it's been a while. I'm sorry. But I think chapter 8 almost beat it, but then chapter 9 almost beat it, but then I decided against it. And I still stand by that. I think Chapter 9 was almost the best map in the game. Anyway, Chapter 10 doesn't even come close. It's fine. It does not. I hate that there are so many magic enemies, and especially that there are so many sleep staff using enemies. It's really obnoxious, and I don't like it one bit. The Julius section is cool, and I like that there are a lot of side objectives like villages and all the kids to visit. Technically, getting tier thing is optional, which is fun. But otherwise, there's not really a whole lot to say. It's a pretty linear map without much going on. So nothing to write home about. It's not bad. Maybe it's bad. If they took out the sleep staves, it wouldn't be bad. It would just be kind of forgettable. The music though is fucking awesome. It's so good. It's like the best map theme in the game probably. Chapter 3 is also really good, but this is probably my favorite overall. Or chapter 7. Damn it. There's so many good map themes in this game. So, time for news. Unfortunately, E3 has come and gone. There is no news about Fire Emblem whatsoever, but that's fine. We got some Breath of the Wild too. Honestly, I'm surprised by what I came away from that E3 most excited about. It's actually the new Mario Party that's coming out in October. I don't know if I'm gonna get it because I don't really play multiplayer games that often, but I have a lot of good memories with Mario Party as like a teenager. I always played Mario Party 2. That was the only one I've ever played. I ever played as a kid, I should say. And now I'm hearing that we're getting some retro mini games, we're getting some retro boards, and it's online. This is the big thing: online multiplayer for the main game mode. I don't know why they didn't have that in Super Mario Party. It's ridiculous. But that's gonna be cool. I might get it, I might not, I'm not sure. But we'll see. But then, there's some other stuff that but there was also some other stuff that I liked. Metroid Dread seems cool. Breath of the Wild 2 obviously looks fucking fantastic. Otherwise, I mean, like there wasn't a lot, but that's fine. I wasn't expecting that much, so doesn't matter. The only other news that I'm seeing here on the Serenus Forest page is that there's actually a lot of new merch coming. Let's see real quick. Okay, so this is actually really cool. There's a charity event going on right now for the Rainforest Foundation, which is a nonprofit devoted to support indigenous and traditional peoples of the world's rainforests in their efforts to protect their environment and fulfill their rights by assisting them in securing and controlling natural resources necessary for long-term well-being and managing these resources in ways which do not harm their environment, violate their culture, or compromise their future, and developing means to protect their individual and collective rights and to obtain, shape, and control basic services from the state. Now, I'm not like, okay, this isn't a dig, it's a great cause. That could have been cleaned up substantially. I started reading it, I committed to it, but damn, that was a really long run-on sentence. There was a semicolon somewhere in there, so maybe that helps. But great cause. They have stickers. It's a fan. Oh, so it's a fan project, right? It's a lot of fan art and fan projects. There's some stickers. There's a tote bag. It looks like, or not a tote bag. I don't know. It's some kind of bag, and they have like scents, like perfume. I don't know. This is really interesting. I would go check this out. It's on the front page of Serenus Forest as of right now, which is June 25th currently. And pre-orders apparently go up to the 30th. So I'm gonna look into this for sure. I would definitely check it out. This seems like a really great idea, a really great project for an awesome cause. And then there's some, I believe, official merchandise. They're little figurines, not figurines even. They kind of look like pins, but I don't think they're pins. They're like little weapon miniatures. They have three distinct products. One of them is the shield from Fire Emblem Awakening, like the fire emblem that Chrom uses as a shield. Then they have the weapons of the protagonists of Fire Emblem 7. So, is it the Monikadi? No, the Soul Kadi, Durandal, and Armads. And then from Genealogy of the Holy War, they have Tyrfing and Gaybolg and Mistletoe. I wouldn't be as interested in that, to be completely honest. First of all, because I don't think I would get any use out of those, but also because it's not going towards a nonprofit, it's going towards like the official company, which is fine. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, but they're $40 each, which is kind of pricey, but and that's it in terms of news. Not a whole lot going on. Again, I was hoping that with E3 there'd be much more to talk about. I was worried actually because this is coming out, or I'm recording this 10 days after the E3 conference. So it's been a while, and I was worried that I was going to be really behind on talking about the new Fire Emblem game, but no, unfortunately, there is nothing to be behind on. But there has been a lot going on in terms of me, in terms of things that I've been watching and playing. So I beat Trails in the Sky. I actually but the Steam sale started yesterday and I bought the second chapter, so I'm going to play that at some point. But in the meantime, I've been on a big Star Wars kick, actually. I've always been a medium-sized Star Wars fan, I would say. I love the idea, I love the concept, and the world is so cool. But I don't think that they've made a good movie since 1970, whatever Return of the Jedi came out. That is the last good Star Wars movie, in my opinion. The prequels are all shit. The sequels are mostly bad. I think Force Awakens is fine, but it's because it leans so heavily on A New Hope. Is the only reason why it's good, probably. It's not even good. It's just like mediocre. And then I don't like Solo and I don't like Rogue One. I know that that last one's kind of a hot take. I think a lot of people stan Rogue One, which is fine. It's not I don't think it's like terrible or anything. I think there's a lot to like there. I just personally didn't get into it. So you might be wondering, well, do you even like Star Wars at that point? And well, yes, I do like the first three movies, but I also have always been interested in the TV shows. I watched a little bit, like a tiny bit of Rebels and like the first season or two of Clone Wars. So I was like, these shows look really good. I want to get into them at some point. And this past month or so has been that some point. I have binged all of the Clone Wars and all of Rebels. I'm gonna start The Mandalorian soon, and then at some point I'm gonna get around to watching Bad Batch. Clone Wars and Rebels were both excellent. I think Clone Wars is the better of the two, maybe, but that's actually, I'm not entirely sure about that. Clone Wars is more consistent, I think. Like, I like most seasons of the Clone Wars. I think even season one has a lot of really good episodes in it. So I don't think that there's a bad season of Clone Wars, and I think that you can definitely say that the first season of Rebels is boring. Honestly, even the first season and a half, first half of season two wasn't that great either. But back half of season two and then all of season three and four were excellent, excellent, excellent. Better than anything in Clone Wars, in my opinion, except maybe some like very, very good one-off episodes, like with especially in season one, they had a couple of really good ones. So that's what I have been up to in terms of watching. I also started Doctor Stone like yesterday, literally yesterday. I started it, and I'm already on episode five because it's really fucking good. Post-production melee here again. I have since finished Doctor Stone. In the 4 days since recording this, I have completely caught up with both seasons of Doctor Stone, and I want more. I'm probably not going to read the manga. I don't like manga as much as anime, generally speaking, but I want more. Please. I mean, the last season just ended like a couple months ago, so we're not going to get more anytime soon. But it was really good. Go watch Doctor Stone or read it if you prefer that. Just whatever. Consume Doctor Stone in some fashion or another because it's really fucking good. And then otherwise, I've just been chilling and I've been playing a few games on Steam, trying to clear out that backlog because I just added a few games to it, but I haven't really beaten anything yet. So, but yeah, I think that that's everything that I have going on right now. So I'm gonna leave it here. Hopefully, I can get this edited and put out for you in the next couple of days. In the meantime, if you have questions or comments or criticism, please send them to turnwheelpodcast@gmail.com and I will happily respond to them. So have a nice rest of your day, and I will talk to you all again soon. Bye bye.